welcome to CUTV. I'm Sean Killen. Today we're here with the lovely CEO of ITN, Rachel Corp. Lovely to have you here in Cardiff at the School of Journalism, Media and Culture. And you're here today for the Sir Tom Hopkinson lecture, of course, titled Saving the News to Save the Nation, How to Ensure Public Service Journalism Survives in the UK and Delivers the News Audiences, what news audiences want and need. To start off, why do you see the future of sort of public service journalism so directly tied to the health of the nation itself?
I think it's what goes to the heart of public service media, full stop, which news is a key part of, is that it's thinking about what audiences need in the UK and the information that they need to make decisions about themselves, their businesses, their families, everything they need to know in a healthy democracy. And I think having fact-based, impartial news that audiences can trust is at the heart of that. And that's what public service journalism is. It's regulated. We have very strict standards, so people know that that content we produce they can trust. And I think that is so vital for a functioning democracy. Since
you do man a lot of the big corporations, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, when you look at current coverage of the state of the world today, the conflicts regarding Gaza and involving figures like Trump and Iran currently, how do you ensure journalism remains accurate without becoming reactive or amplifying uncertainty?
Yes. So the most important thing for me is eyewitness journalism, and you cannot replace that. It's going out into the field, to the heart of the story, talking to the people who are at the centre of it. And that has always been what we like to do. The couple of those stories that you flag have been really challenging because we're not there. We're not in Iran. We would like to be in Iran. We have been managing to get some content out of there, but nothing beats journalists being in there. And for example, one of the most frustrating things for me was when the girls' school was hit, then day one or day two. Now normally we'd have been all over that, getting onto the ground, verifying what had happened, talking to people. We couldn't do that, and I think that story took quite a while to come through and took quite a while for people to interrogate. Gaza is the other one, of course. Now, we've been wanting and lobbying, along with other journalists from the beginning, to be able to get in on the ground and talk to people and see what's happening. Luckily for us, but really difficult for them, is we've had a network of Gazan journalists who have been beyond brave, risking their lives to go out and tell the story. And we've been bringing that back in and pulling that together in London under the same standards that we would do if we were there. But I think for me, the main thing is getting there. One of the most important bits of journalism that I would say we've done in the last 6 years now, 5-6 years, was when Trump had lost his second election and the crowds went in, his supporters went in and stormed the Capitol. It was an ITN crew, an ITV news crew, were the only people to actually go in with the protesters and be at the heart of it. And our coverage went viral because we were the only ones in there. But what you had was a lot of, particularly the American broadcasters, standing outside or sitting in studios, arguing about what was happening, what was right, what was wrong. We just went in with them and said effectively, why are you here and what do you want? And that's so much more powerful. So I think remembering that journalism really is about telling the story from where it's happening, that sets you up against a lot of the other swirl that's going on.
You've also spoken in the past with the sort of new digital era and modern era about AI. And one of the quotes that I saw was, you said, nothing AI generated will go out about masquerading as journalism. How, within specifically ITN, how are you navigating newsroom skills now, and how do you sort of draw the line between human-led journalism and AI-assisted journalism?
It was a couple of years ago, possibly, I said that, and it still stands true today. We issued some guidelines around that time, which you're quoting from, and we've reissued them now. And in terms of the sort of journalism side of it, nothing's changed. The tools have become more sophisticated, and I think that's really exciting in lots of ways. So look at the Epstein story. I mean, that is the biggest document dump I think we've known for decades at least. And using AI tools to help go through large chunks of data has been brilliant, and you're seeing different things surfacing at different times. So that is the work that might have taken somebody a really long time. It's supporting in that, but very much the interpretation of what we're looking for or how we interpret the story is human-led. We've also done a lot of other similar stories through Channel 4 News and others where you are crunching through data or using it for searching, but it's people being in charge of it. What we haven't done any of is versioning, using any of the models to do text or to come up with any of the storytelling. We've used and we continue to use AI tools and production techniques. So we did a big documentary recently about Lucy Letby, which was #1 on Netflix. You might have seen it. And we had some vulnerable witnesses in it who wanted to talk anonymously, rather than doing blacking out the faces or pixelating it. We actually used AI faces on top to anonymise them. It's quite controversial. Some people like it, some people don't. But that was a technique that we experimented on within our current affairs portfolio, rather than in the news bulletins. We're doing some stuff in our galleries. So one of the scourges of sort of journalism and accuracy is when you spell people's names wrongly in Astons or captions. So we've got a tool that picks up on that and checks on that. Those are all things that support and enhance, and they're also not replacing journalists at all. But we've done a survey, which I'll talk about later, with Deloitte, where we looked at what our journalists were using. We wanted to know, and there's the official and the unofficial, and we wanted to understand the unofficial. And actually people are experimenting, particularly in retrieving data and certainly analysing data, but a lot of scepticism about the actual journalistic side of it. I like to think, I didn't come up with this, there's one way of approaching AI is, what would you do if you had 10,000 interns? And I think that's a brilliant way of looking at it, because you wouldn't get your intern to write the lead story on News at 10 or to be on a podcast for Channel 4, but you would get them to go and do all that work that takes forever. So I think we approach it a bit like that. And it enables us to do more, but it doesn't take away the journalistic part.
As student media, I realized you started off in student radio as doing a history degree and not following sort of the typical doing a journalism degree. How did that experience within student radio and freelance reporting shape your approach to newsroom leadership and building up that experience to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. And again, I'll touch on it later. Mine was an old-fashioned degree. I had a lot of time on my hands. It's a bit different now, and there weren't quite the broadcast degrees. And so I sort of slightly fell into it. I think one of the first things for me about doing student radio was not just thinking about what I'm interested in, was about thinking what would be interesting to audiences. And also thinking about, okay, if I'm surfacing this view, I might need to surface another view. So just thinking about that balance and finding interesting voices. I then went on to freelancing and lots of things that came out of that. One of the best things I think about freelancing was if I wanted to earn any money, I had to come up with stories. And so it was working out what's an interesting story, again, not what's interesting to me, but what travels, and how do I pull a top line out, and who are the interesting voices in, and how do I move it on, and then who I go and pitch it to. And even if you're not freelance, pitching your story is a part of daily life, because you might have to persuade your editor or your program editor or a reporter. So not just working out what was a good story, but how to make that relatable. One of the most important things for me is at that era, as well as a freelancer, I went to Bosnia, where the war was still going on, and was doing some stories about young people and working with quite a seasoned journalist. And he taught me the power of eyewitness journalism and going into a community and asking questions like, suddenly, if there's no men around, why are there no men around? Is it because there's a battle that's going on? Or trying to piece things together, and nothing beats that. But plus, because that was quite a complex story, how to translate that for audiences. Again, you can't assume if you say this name, everyone will know it. So putting it into context and making it relatable. So I think those early bits really pushed me towards what ended up as being public service journalism.
And
don't go to a war zone. I'm not advocating that as the main thing.
I'll take that advice. With also, I think today actually marks 50 days till the upcoming Senate elections, and Scottish elections also coming up. And there's intense public interest and fervour regarding that. How do you see yourself with news orgs that you're managing? How do you see yourself adjusting to ensure voters receive accurate, impartial, and meaningful coverage that helps them make the right and informed decisions?
So I hope on the accurate and impartial, we don't need to change anything because that's what we've always done. The sort of relevant, I suppose. I think, we have national bulletins, so there is an element of making sure the stories relate to anybody watching in the entire country, not just people voting, and there's local news as well. But I think the stories are so important, and what's at stake is so important. So I think it goes back to getting to the heart of the story with people here, what matters to them, not assuming that we know, but it's going and asking people what are the things that are going to determine their vote and what's the likely impact of that, and then relaying that. But I think if you start with people, that's relatable wherever you are in the UK. I think if you just sat with politicians arguing, maybe somebody in another part of the country would think this is nothing to do with me. But it's also about the people involved. So for ITV, we have a Wales correspondent based here who is specifically tasked with covering Wales. So he knows it inside out. Channel 4 have a very senior team here as well. Channel 5 will be sending people in. But it's not assuming that we know what the stories are. It's coming in and very much making sure we're talking to people here.
And of course, there will be tons of, as this is Jomac focused, lots of young journalists watching this. What advice would you give to young journalists trying to break into the industry and just starting out? What advice would you give them in trying to break into that industry?
I think the one thing I often say to people, it sort of goes back to when I was freelancing, it's coming up with stories and ideas. And it doesn't have to be the next biggest investigation into something huge. It might be an idea or a person who's interesting. So if you are doing work experience or you've got a chance to be in a team or you're freelancing or junior, speak up with your ideas. Those of us who've been doing it forever, we're quite jaded off and quite tired. We've run out of ideas. Your idea is as good as the seasoned hack that you might be sat next to. Or it might be just a germ of an idea. And very often you'll be seeing things that we're not seeing. Your socials will be coming up with something else. And a lot of our best investigations recently have come up through our very junior members of our social team who might say, look, I'm just seeing this thing on TikTok. It seems to be growing. And that can surface all sorts of stories that you're not going to get through the conventional ways. So, bring the ideas in.
And to sort of end on a positive note, so we're sort of talking about the fear of journalism and sort of the negative tones on it. What gives you the most confidence that journalism can still evolve in ways that genuinely would serve audiences in the UK?
I think good, interesting, original journalism cuts through and people want it. And I find we get all these surveys, Reuters and others, saying that people are beginning to avoid the news, particularly in the UK, with sort of one of the worst countries for that. And you talk to people and they go, oh, I don't listen to the news. And then you say, okay, but that story about mould in social housing across the UK, did you see that? Oh, yeah, no, I saw that. I'm like, okay, that's some of our journalism. Or you might say, this is old now, but Partygate. You say, oh, yeah, no, we saw that. So another, okay, that's our journalism. But just because they're not sitting down to watch news at 10, as it goes on air, on television, doesn't mean they're not consuming our journalism. So I think people want it. I think there's a desire for it. I actually think all the different platforms, it's really exciting. It means you can adapt your storytelling. I'm sure, I don't need to tell you this, but people often say, oh, young people, they're not interested. Young people are really interested. And it's just our duty to tell it in a way that's engaging.
All right, well, that's all I have. Thank you very much for talking with us, and enjoy and good luck with your lecture later on today.
Thank you, and really good luck with your journalism.
Thank you.